Hey everybody, welcome to the Blue Collar Angst podcast, where we dive deep into the realm of any and really everything blue collar. We're going to take a look at a wide range of trades and careers that range from welders and electricians to police officers and everything in between. The guests we bring on the show, the listeners, really essentially you, are the fuel that keep this whole thing going. With that being said, please enjoy, and as always, like, subscribe, follow, do whatever it is that you do to stay up to date so that you don't miss a thing. Thanks. Enjoy the show. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Blue Collar Angst. Really excited to have you guys on here. This is a 4th of July special. It's something that I'm very passionate about and, think very highly of is the foundation of our government and really the foundations of America. So I know this is a worldwide audience. We have a lot of guests from different locations. I mentioned a shout out a few episodes ago, and I just wanted to do that really quick. So we have the United States, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Australia, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Sweden, and within that, the different breakdowns of the different towns. I'll give you guys specific shout outs, but I'm so grateful that the Blue Collar Angst is getting out there and that people are tuning in and really understanding and listening to the blue collar message. So with that being said, we have a really special guest with us today, somebody that's near and dear to my heart, my sweet little girl, Peyton Lynn, my daughter. So you have a couple things you wanted to say? She's going to come and recite the Pledge of Allegiance for us really quick. She's 5 years old, going into kindergarten, and she's very proud of her country, just like I am. And she wants to come on here and just recite the Pledge of Allegiance before I kick things off. So you want to go for it?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all.
Good job. Good job. You have anything else you want to say?
I love America.
You love America. Hey, thank you so much. Thank you, Pepe.
Love you, Daddy.
Love you. With that being said, it is a worldwide audience. It's something I'm very aware of and I'm grateful for. I think it's important that we all have, a patriotism or a sense of involvement in our own countries, wherever we may be. I think that's something that might be lacking nowadays. But if we could kind of recapture that wherever you may be, whether you're in Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, United States, Canada, all these different countries that are tuning into the podcast. But with that being said, I wanted to start today off, and it's going to be a short little 4th of July special. I hope everybody's enjoying their weekend with their families. And I just wanted to start it off with, we're going to read a little bit out of a book called Common Sense. It's a book, or really a publication, that it started out as a pamphlet, as a way to really inspire the American people. And it's something that was written by Thomas Paine in 1776. And, such a volatile time in America, or in the colonies at that time. And, independence was an idea, and nobody really knew if it was going to be a thing or not. And this has been happening, the 13 colonies for years and years. You had the Townsend Act, you had the Stamp Act, you had the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, all these preemptive events that led to this being written, and eventually to the Declaration of Independence being published and written for the whole world to see. So a little bit about Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, he's a prominent figure during the American Revolution. He was actually, very renowned political activist and writer. So he was born in 1737, January 29th, 1737, in Thetford, Norfolk, England. And any listeners in the UK, if I say any of these words wrong, please send in a message and let me know. But definitely his most influential work was Common Sense, the pamphlet that was published in 1776. So this played a huge role in inspiring and rallying the American colonies towards independence from British rule. But before, just a little bit more about him. Before his involvement in the American Revolution, Paine had a varied career. So he's he's done a few different things before he was really an author and a patriot. So it just said he worked as a corset maker, an excise officer, and also a school teacher. And before he came to the United States or the 13 colonies, he actually spent some time in France as well. But in the early 1770s, Paine had immigrated to the American colonies, looking for a fresh start, just like most immigrants still today are looking for. And he was drawn to the growing resistance against British law and rule. So in 1774, he began writing for a Philadelphia periodical called the Pennsylvania Magazine, and he expressed his support for the American independence cause. But really, when he started taking off and got very mainstream, was the pamphlet Common Sense. That really kind of put him into the spotlight and catapulted him and his name into the history books. So we'll kind of dive into this. And like I said, I'm just going to read a section of it. I'll drop some links. You can buy this book. It's 47 or 43 pages. I think it's 47 pages, but it's something that's worth the read, worth to have in your library. Just a very stirring cause and remembrance of, what the temperament of that day was and what people thought back in that time. So, like I said, 4th of July special, just think about, as you're listening to me read out of this section, I'm going to read the first section. It's called Common Sense on the Origin and Design of Government in General, and with concise remarks on the English Constitution. So just with that being said, guys, just think about, how pertinent the things that he said are then in 1776 and how they still apply today. That's something I think is really cool, is that everything that he's talking about back in 200 plus years ago, he's talking about today, and they still apply today. So I'll get right into it. It's just, it for me, this really just brings in the temperament, the scene. It sets the whole background of the American Revolution, something that I mentioned a few different events before, but really this is, a lot of loyalists were still in the colonies. People, and they had a rough time too, with having support. If they supported the crown, a lot of these people, they had a tarred and feathered or different things like that. And some of the events that led up to Thomas Paine writing this pamphlet was, the destruction of farms and properties, or the British stealing, from their harvests and things like that. So it was just a very unique time for American history. And something, like I said, obviously to post this as the episode, something that I feel very passionate about, but I'll get right into it. So it says, some writers have so confounded society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections, the latter negatively by restraining our vices. The one encourages intercourse, the other creates distinctions. The first is a patron, the last is a punisher. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. For when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built upon the ruins of the bowers of paradise. For were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man need no other lawgiver, but that, not being the case, he finds it necessary to surrender up a part of his property to furnish means for the protection of the rest. And he is induced by the same prudence which in every other case advises him, out of two evils to choose the least. Wherefore, security being the true design and end of government, it unanswerably follows that whatever form thereof appears most likely to ensure it to us, with the least expense and greatest benefit, is preferable to all others. In order to gain a clear and just idea of the design and end of government, Let us suppose a small number of persons settled in some sequestered part of the earth, unconnected with the rest. Then they will then represent the first peopling of any country or of the world. In this state of natural liberty, society will be the first thought. 1,000 motives will excite them thereto. The strength of one man is so unequal to his wants, and his mind so unfitted for perpetual solitude, that he is soon obliged to seek assistance and relief of another, who in his turn requires the same. 4 or 5 united would be able to raise a tolerable dwelling in the midst of a wilderness, but one man might labor out the common period of life without the accomplishing anything. When he had felled his timber, he could not remove it, nor erect it after it was removed. Hunger in the meantime would urge him to quit his work, and every different want would call him a different way. Disease, nay, even misfortune, would be death. For though neither might be mortal, yet either would disable him from living, and reduce him to a state in which he might rather be said to perish than to die. Thus necessity, like a gravitating power, would soon form our newly arrived immigrants into society, the reciprocal blessing of which would supersede and render the obligations of law and government unnecessary, while they remain perfectly just to each other. But as nothing but heaven is impregnable to vice, it will unavoidably happen that in proportion as they surmount the first difficulties of immigration, which bound them together in a common cause, they will begin to relax in their duty and attachment to each other. And this remnants will point out the necessity of establishing some form of government to supply the defect of moral virtue. Some convenient tree will afford them a state house, under the branches of which the whole colony may assemble to deliberate on public matters. It is more than probable that their first laws will have the only of regulations and be enforced by no other penalty than public disesteem. In this first parliament, every man by natural right will have a seat. But as the colony increases, the public concerns will increase likewise, and the distance at which the members may be separated will render it too inconvenient for all of them to meet on every occasion, as at first, when their number was small, their habitations near, and their public concerns few and trifling. This will point out the convenience of their consenting to leave the legislative part to be managed by a select number chosen from the whole body, who are supposed to have the same concerns at stake which those who have appointed them, and who will act in the same manner as the whole body would act, were they present. If the colony continue increasing, it will become necessary to augment the number of representatives, and that the interest of every part of the colony may be attended to, it will be found best to divide the whole into convenient parts, each part sending its proper number, because as the elected might by that means return a mix again within the general body of the electors in a few months, their fidelity to the public will be secured by the prudent reflection of not making a rod for themselves, and this frequent interchange will establish a common interest with every part of the community. They will mutually and naturally support each other, and on this, not on the meaning or unmeaning name of the king, depends the strength of the government and the happiness of the governed. Here then is the origin and rise of government, namely a mode rendered necessary by the inability of moral virtue to govern the world. Here too is the design and end of government, freedom and security. And however our eyes may be dazzled with the show, or our ears may be deceived by sound, however prejudice may warp our wills, or interest darken our understanding, the simple voice of nature and reason will say, "'Tis right." I draw my idea of the form of government from a principle in nature which no art can overturn, that the more simple anything is, the less liable it is to be disordered, and the easier repaired when disordered. And with this maxim in view, I offer a few remarks on the so much boasted Constitution of England that was noble for the dark, and slavish in which it was erected, is granted. When the world was overrun with tyranny, the least removed them therefrom was glorious rescue. But that it is imperfect, subject to convulsions, and incapable of producing what it seems to promise, is easily demonstrated. Absolute governments, though the disgrace of human nature, have this advantage with them: they are simple, the people suffer, they know the head from which they are suffering springs. Know likewise the remedy, and are not bewildered by a variety of causes and cures. But the Constitution of England is so exceedingly complex that the nation may suffer for years together without being able to discover in which part the fault lies. Some will say in one, and some in another, and every political physician will advise a different medicine. I know it's difficult to get over long or local standing prejudices, yet if we will suffer ourselves to examine the component parts of the English Constitution, we shall find them the base remains of two ancient tyrannies, compounded with some new republican materials. First, the remains of monarchical tyranny in the person of the king. Secondly, the remains of aristocratical tyranny in the person of the peers. And thirdly, the new republican materials in the persons of the commons, on whose virtue depends the freedom of England. There is something exceedingly ridiculous in the composition of monarchy. It first concludes a man from the means of information, yet empowers him to act in cases where the highest judgment is required. The state of a king shuts him from the world, yet the business of a king requires him to know it thoroughly. Wherefore, the different parts, by unnaturally opposing and destroying each other, prove the whole character to be absurd and useless. Some writers have explained the English Constitution thus: the king, say they, is one, the people another. The peers are a house in behalf of the king, the commons in behalf of the people. But this hath all the distinctions of a house divided against itself. And though the expressions be pleasantly arranged, yet when examined they appear idle and ambiguous. And it will always happen that the nicest construction that words are capable of, when applied to the description of something which either cannot exist or is too incomprehensible to be within the compass of description, will be words of sound only, and though they may amuse the ear, they cannot inform the mind. Such a power cannot be the gift of a wise people. Neither can any power which needs checking be from God, yet the provision which the Constitution makes supposes such a power to exist. The prejudice of Englishmen in favor of their own government by kings, lords, and commons arises as much or more from national pride than reason. Individuals are undoubtedly safer in England than in some other countries, but the will of the king is much the law of the land in Britain as in France, with this difference that instead of proceeding directly from his mouth, it is handed to the people under the formidable shape of an act of parliament. For the fate of Charles the First hath only made kings more subtle, not more just. Wherefore, laying aside all national pride and prejudice in favor of modes and forms, the plain truth is that it is wholly owing to the constitution of the people, and not to the constitution of the government, that the crown is not as oppressive in England as in Turkey. An inquiry into the constitutional errors in the English form of government is at this time highly necessary, for as we never in a proper conditioning of doing justice to others, while we continue under the influence of some leading partially, so neither are we capable of doing it to ourselves while we remain fettered by an obstinate prejudice. And as a man who is attached to a prostitute is unfitted to choose a judge or a wife, so any preposition in favor of rotten constitution of government will disable us from discerning a good one. Mankind being originally equals in the order of creation, the equality could only be destroyed by some subsequent circumstance. The distinctions of rich and poor may in great measure be accounted for, and that without having recourse to the harsh, ill-sounding names of the oppression and avarice. Oppression is often the consequence, but seldom or never the means of riches. And though avarice will preserve a man from being necessitously poor, it generally makes him too timorous to be wealthy. You know, guys, one thing I just want to end on this note within Thomas Paine's book or pamphlet. What powerful language. You know, you think about the language back in that time. You think about, man, this might sound weird to us right now, but, you know, this is how they talked back in that time. And some people would call this propaganda, right? It depends on whose side you were looking on. But this is seriously some very important and really impactful things. This article is something that pushed somebody that was on the fence that said, I don't know if I want to get involved in this, to go join the Continental Army and to go join George Washington and the generals to go fight for America to make it free. I kind of want to end with this, and it's something that it's powerful language. It's the same type of things that we've been hearing throughout this episode, but it's something that I think is very important. I think it's something that applies today. So just to continue with Thomas Paine, it says the nearer any government approaches to a republic, the less business there is for a king. It is somewhat difficult to find a proper name for the government of England. Sir William Meredith calls it a republic, but in its present state it is unworthy of the name because the corrupt influence of the crown, by having all the places in its disposal, hath so effectually swallowed up the power and eaten out of the virtue of the House of Commons. Men fall out with names without understanding them, for 'tis the republican and the monarchical part of the Constitution of England which Englishmen glory in, the liberty of choosing the House of Commons from their own body. And it's easy to see that when republican virtues fail, slavery ensues. Why is the Constitution of England sickly? But because monarchy hath poisoned the republic, and the crown hath engrossed the commons. Thomas Paine ends with this in his last section, and I think this is this is the stirring up. This is the motivating part to the colonies at this time. All the different immigrants from wherever you came from, try to put yourself in their shoes. And after you've read through some of the things that we had just talked about, think about what this would mean to you if you were in their position in this time. And this kind of puts into perspective too, like what they were getting into, right? Like who they were facing, who the enemy was. So he finishes with, it says, the sun never shined on a cause or greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a county, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent, of at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe. 'Tis not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity are virtually involved in the contest, and will be more or less affected, even to the end of time, by the proceedings now. Now is the seed time of continental union, faith, and honor. The least fracture now will be like a name engraved with the point of a pin on the tender ring of a young oak. The wound would enlarge with the tree, and posterity read it in full-grown characters. I have heard it asserted by some that as America has flourished under her former connection with Great Britain, the same connection is necessary towards her future happiness, and will always have the same effect. Nothing can be more fallacious than this kind of argument. We may as well assert that because a child has thrived upon milk, that it is never to have meat, or that the first 20 years of our lives is to become a precedent for the next 20. But even this is admitting more than is true, for I answer roundly that America would have flourished as much, and probably much more, had no European power taken any notice of her. The commerce by which she hath enriched herself are the necessaries of life, and will have always have a market while eating in the custom of Europe. The authority of Great Britain over this continent is a form of government, which sooner or later must have an end, and a serious mind can draw no true pleasure by looking forward, under the painful and positive conviction that what he calls the present Constitution is merely temporary. As parents, we can have no joy, knowing that this government is not sufficiently lasting to ensure anything which we may bequeath to posterity. And by a plain method of argument, as we are running the next generation into debt, we ought to do the work of it. Otherwise, we may use them meanly and pitfully. In order to discover the line of our duty rightly, we should take our children in our hand and fix our station a few years farther into life. That eminence will present a prospect which a few present fears and prejudices conceal from our sight. Though I would carefully avoid giving unnecessary offense, yet I am inclined to believe that all those who espouse the doctrine of reconciliation may be included with the following descriptions: interested men who are not to be trusted, weak men who cannot see, prejudiced men who will not see, and a certain set of moderate men who think it better of the European world than it deserves. And this last class, by an ill-judged deliberation, will be the cause of more calamities to this continent than all the other three. It is good fortune of many to live distant from the scene of present sorrow. The evil is not sufficiently brought to the doors to make them feel the precariousness with all the American property that is possessed. But let our imaginations transport us a few moments to Boston. The seat of wretchedness will teach us wisdom, and instruct us forever to renounce a power in whom we can have no trust. The inhabitants of that unfortunate city, who but a few months ago were in ease and affluence, have now no other alternative than to stay and starve, or turn out to beg, endangered by the fire of their friends if they continue within the city, and plundered by the soldiery if they leave it. In their present situation, they are prisoners without the hope of redemption, and in a general attack for their relief, they would be exposed to the fury of both armies. Men of passive tempers look somewhat lightly over the offenses of Great Britain, and still hoping for the best are apt to call out, "Come, come, we shall be friends again for all of this." But examine the passions and feelings of mankind. Bring the doctrine of reconciliation to the touchstone of nature, and then tell me whether you can hereafter love, honor, and faithfully serve the power that hath carried fire and sword into your land. If you cannot do all of these, then are you only deceiving yourselves, and by your delay bringing ruin upon your posterity. Your future connection with Britain, whom you can neither love nor honor, will be forced and unnatural, and being formed only on the plan of a present convenience, will in a little time fall into a relapse more wretched than the first. But if you say you can still pass the violations over, then I ask, hath your house been burnt? Hath your property been destroyed before your face? Are your wife and children destitute of a bed to lie on, or bread to live on? Have you lost a parent or a child by their hands, and yourself the ruined and wretched survivor? If you have not, then you are not a judge of those who have. But if you have, and can still shake hands with the murderers, then you are unworthy the name of husband, father, friend, or lover, whatever may be your rank and title in life, and you have the heart of a coward and the spirit of a sycophant. This is not inflaming or exaggerating matters, but trying them by these feelings and affections which nature justifies, and without which we would be incapable of discharging the social duties of life, or enjoying the felicities of it. I mean not to exhibit horror for the purpose of provoking revenge, but to awaken us from this fatal and unmanly slumbers, that we may pursue determinately some fixed object. 'Tis not in the power of Britain or of Europe to conquer America, if she doth not conquer herself by delay and timidity. The present winter is worth an age if rightly employed, but if lost or neglected, the whole continent will partake in its misfortune. And there is no punishment which a man doth not deserve, but he who be, or what, or where he will, that may be the means of sacrificing a season so precious and useful. 'Tis repugnant to reason, to the universal order of things, to all examples from former ages, to suppose that this continent can no longer remain subject to external power. The most sanguine in Britain doth not think so. The utmost stretch of human wisdom cannot at this time compass a plan, short of separation, which can compromise the continent even a year's security. Reconciliation is now a fallacious dream. Nature hath deserted the connection, and art cannot supply her place. For as Milton wisely expresses, never can true reconciliation grow where wounds of deadly hate have pierced so deep. Every quiet method for peace hath been ineffectual. Our prayers have been rejected with disdain, and hath tended to convince us that nothing flatters vanity or conforms obstinacy in kings more than repeated petitioning, and nothing hath contributed more than that very measure to make the kings of Europe absolute. To say we will never attempt it again is idle and visionary. We thought so at the repeal of the Stamp Act, yet a year or two undeceived us. As well may we suppose that the nations which have been once defeated will never renew the quarrel. As to government matters, 'tis not in the power of Britain to do this continent justice. The business of it will soon be too weighty and intricate to be managed with any tolerable degree of convenience. and by power so distant from us, and so very ignorant of us. For if they cannot conquer us, they cannot govern us. To be always running 3 or 4 thousand miles with a tell or petition, waiting 4 or 5 months for an answer, which, when obtained, requires a 5 or 6 months more to explain it, will in a few years be looked upon as a folly and childness. There was a time when it was proper, and there is a proper time for it to cease. I am not induced by motives of pride, party, resentment to espouse a doctrine of separation and independence. I am clearly, positively, and consciously persuaded that it's true interest of this continent to be so, that everything short of that is mere patchwork, that it can afford no lasting felicity, that it's leaving the sword to our children and shrinking back at the time when a little more, a little further, would have rendered this continent the glory of the earth. The present time, likewise, is a peculiar time which never happens to a nation but once, the time of forming itself into a government. Most nations have let slip the opportunity, and by that means have been compelled to receive laws from their conquerors, instead of making laws for themselves. First they had a king, and then a form of government, whereas the articles or charter of government should be formed first, and men delegated to execute them afterwards. But from the errors of other nations let us learn wisdom, and lay hold upon the present opportunity to begin government at the right end. Paine goes on and concludes with this, and this is what I'll end on as well. But he just says, immediate necessities make many things convenient, which, if continued, would grow into oppressions. Expedience and right are different things. When the calamities of America required a consultation, there was no method so ready, or at that time so proper, as to appoint the persons from the several houses of assembly for that purpose. And the wisdom with which they have proceeded hath preserved this continent from ruin. But as more than probable that we shall never be without a Congress, every well-wisher to good order must own that mode for choosing members for that body. It deserves consideration. And I put a question to those who make a study of mankind, whether representation and election is not too great a power for one and the same body of men to possess. When we are planning for posterity, we ought to remember that virtue is not hereditary. Thank you guys for listening. I know it was a shorter, different type of episode. This is something that I feel really passionate about. I thought a lot about what I wanted to talk about today on the 4th of July, on Independence Day, or at least it being released on the 4th. And I thought about the Battle of Trenton. I thought about how George Washington inspired his men to cross that river to attack the Hessian army that was guarding the backs of the British at that time. And doing research for that, I learned a few things, that not only did they cross the frozen Delaware to go attack on Christmas, but they also did that. They crossed the river and then they walked 9 miles, which a lot of these troops, a lot of these soldiers at that time didn't even have shoes. Some of them had strapped bark to their feet to try to keep the snow off of their feet or their socks that they had left. So truly, I appreciate everybody listening. I think it's one of the coolest things to have a platform to try to do the right thing. I think that's a duty of the podcast. Bringing all these guests on that we have had on here and working through the logistics and their background and getting it out to you guys. It's a special thing, and I'm very grateful for it. I just wanted to end with something that I came across on Facebook, something that kind of hit me hard and made me think about, well, what does Independence Day mean to me? And, something I've always thought of through the fireworks, through the celebration, being older, being in the trades, getting the time off. Sometimes it's easy to forget what we're really celebrating. And this quote makes me think about when I was a kid and I would listen to the fireworks outside. And I still do it to this day, where I'd listen to the booms and, the loud explosions of the fireworks. And I just close my eyes for a minute and think about, what if that was a battle right now in America? What did those early colonial, the very first, Americans that came here, what did they feel and what did they hear? So with this quote, though, is really special and it puts it in perspective for me. It's by Amos Benjamin. He's from Birmingham, Alabama. He's a Marine Corps veteran. Our flag does not fly from the wind moving it. It flies from the last breath of every service member that died defending it. Remember that as we celebrate our Independence Day. So just a really cool way to kind of end this episode, this tribute. Having a veteran share something like that, and so randomly, coming across that and finding it just puts it perfectly. So with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I hope you learned something. Like I said, I'll drop the link for this book, Common Sense by Thomas Paine. You can buy it on Amazon, find it online, just wherever you find it. Just take a few minutes, maybe just scroll through it on the 4th of July and on Independence Day. So I appreciate you guys. Have some really cool guests lined up for you. August is getting full, July is full, booked out with guests. And I'm very thankful for that. Thank you guys for sharing. Thank you guys for listening and tuning in. And it's just going to keep getting better, guys. And, you know, I'm so grateful that I can be a part of this movement. If you guys have any comments, feel free to email us at stories@bluecollarangst.com, or you can even send us a message on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll make sure to get back to you guys. But thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week. Our guest next week is Josh Richmond. He's a structural fitter, and he's going to talk a lot about his recovery into how it's a process going from alcohol to drugs, getting clean, going back into it. So really a cool episode and a wild life. It felt like I was talking to somebody that was 80 years old, but really cool stuff. So be excited for that. Tune into that next week, and thanks for tuning in.